My name is Angie Von Slaughter, and I'm the lead pastor here at One Church. I'm normally not back here doing the music, but since we have Steve, who is the wonderful speaker tonight, speaking, I thought I would hop on here with my friends. We hope that if you're in here for the first time, I recognize some of you might not have been in a church for a while. Maybe this is the first place that you've found, and you've done a little bit of church hopping or hunting. I think most of us in this place have been in that same spot, and I actually didn't find this community for probably 8 years. It took me a long time. I felt like I was in the wilderness for a really long time, cycling around that mountain again and again and again. And I landed in this place years ago, and feeling for the first time what maybe it felt like to be accepted by people. Because I think most of us know that we're accepted by God. It's often we don't know that we're accepted by people who sometimes say that they represent God. And in this place, we hope that you feel, no matter who you are, where you're from, what your story is, your history, your background, we hope that you feel that inclusive love. So it's on the screen. We say that every week, but we hope that you feel that love. We also are a place that really encourages you to seek, to ask questions. If you have doubts, that's okay. Chances are we probably have some ourselves. And we do that together as a community. And that's an ancient practice. So if you're hearing this going, what? It's a very ancient practice, even before Jesus himself. But you see this questioning and asking and dialoguing, and that's what we want to do as a community. We have a wonderful guest speaker tonight, although he's not really a guest so much anymore because he's becoming quite a regular, isn't he? Do you guys want to welcome Steve McCarthy?
Hey, what's up, everybody? How are we doing? Good? Okay, if any big kids didn't get dismissed yet for those Sunday service, I think they all left. It looks like they're all gone. There's no children here anymore. Great, awesome. Hey, my name is Steve. If we have not had a chance to meet yet, I've been coming here to One Church for about 1 year now, but I'm no stranger to church. I grew up going to church, and in fact, right out of high school, I got involved with a ministry called Young Life that I stayed involved with for many, many years. And I wanted to tell you about a moment that I had with some of my Young Life kids that I was working with. This is like 12 years ago, probably 12, 13 years ago. We got it into our heads, me and like 3 other guys, we decided we are going to go to Disneyland. It is the Mecca, it is the happiest place on earth, whatever, we're going. And so we had figured out a way to wrangle us some free passes, which was awesome. I found us a free place to stay, also awesome, because I'm broke, because I work for church, whatever. And so we'd figured out this way to do it, and so we're like, all right, we're doing this, we're going. So the first thing we do is we get on my computer, we load up MapQuest, because it's ancient technology. We load up MapQuest, and we print off the directions to go. Did anybody ever do this before? Yes? Okay, thank God I'm not the oldest person here. So we print off directions, we're like getting ready to go, and we start heading out. And everything is going great. It's like a straight shot out to LA, and then we hit LA. Okay, so just for way of background, I have here a map of Phoenix. Now, if you look at the map of Phoenix, it's beautiful. It is laid out in these grids. It is very easy to navigate your way around. It's a very forgiving street system. Yeah, amen. Do we love Phoenix? Yes. Okay. This is a map of LA. I don't think it's quite to scale. They may have moved a few exits since then. I don't know. That is how it felt to me, at least, driving in LA. We get over there, we miss like one turn. And in Phoenix, if you miss one exit on a freeway, it's like, it's okay, just take the next one and go back. In LA, it's like, no, you're screwed, sorry. It's like, you're never going to get where you want to go. So we're like, our MapQuest directions are essentially useless at this point. We're like driving around the city, trying to figure out where the heck we're going. At one point, my friend Max, who is sitting next to me, he's like, I think at the next street you go left or right. And I'm like, Max, that is useless information. Please be better. So we somehow stop at a gas station. We ask for directions. We do the whole thing. We find the place where we're staying. We drop off all our stuff. It's really late now. It's like 9 or 10 at night. But because we are from Arizona, where do we want to go? The beach. We're like, we don't care what time it is. We don't care how cold the water might be. We're going to the beach. So we go to the beach. It's like 11 at night. We do the stupid Arizona thing. We run and jump in the water. We're like, it's cold. And then we play in the sand or whatever. And eventually beach patrol drives by. He's like, the beach is closed. What are you doing? We're like, we're from Arizona. He's like, get out of here. So we get in my car. We start leaving. It's 3-ish in the morning at this point. So the streets are pretty empty. And we're sitting at this stoplight when all of a sudden this guy appears out of nowhere, and he walks out in front of my car, and he motions for me to roll down the window. So I roll down my window, and he's like, hey, my car won't start. Can you come give us a jump? And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to show these guys what a good Christian I am. We are going to go help this guy with his jump. So he directs us into this pitch black alley, where I pull up my car next to him, and I get out, and I'm starting to feel a little kind of weird about the situation. I'm like, okay, we're in this pitch black alley. He's got the jumper cables hooked up. It's not working. It's pretty clear at this point his battery is not dead. So we're like, okay. And then my friend Mike, who was one of the guys, high school students who was with me, is watching the guy, and he sees the guy reach into his glove box and rustle around in there for a minute. And Mike was like, at that point, I knew we were going to die. We didn't die. I'm right here. But he's rustling around his glove box looking for this thing. And then he closes the glove box. He looks up at us and he says, you should leave now. We're like, okay, that's all we need. We are out of here. We hop in my car. We start driving back. I'm like, you will never tell your parents what happened here today. I love that moment, one, because they all kept their promise and they didn't tell their parents, which was great, and now I'm just exposing it to the world, because who cares? They're adults. But what I love of that moment is just that flash of thought that I had in my brain of going, I'm going to show them what a good Christian I am by doing this thing. Which is weird. If you've grown up in church like me, I'm guessing you might have had a moment like that in some point in your life where you're like, yeah, I'm going to do this thing to prove to you who I am, to prove to you that I hold this identity of being a good Christian. Because that, for me, at that point in my life, that was one of the most important things to me, was to be seen as a good person. And what's interesting about this moment is you take this and you go, okay, so I have this desire to be seen as a good Christian. Now, in that moment, I did something as a result of that desire that did not impress anybody. In fact, it lowered their opinion of me, right? But I could have done something else and it might have raised someone's opinion of me, right? If I had gone back there and it had been if he had his pregnant wife there with their sobbing 2-year-old and jumped his car, it would have been this amazing moment. They'd been oh, Steve is such a good guy. We do these things, and yet the outcome can be so different. We seek to validate our identity, and yet maybe our identity gets validated and we feel good about it. Maybe it doesn't, and we feel bad. Here's what I'm getting at with this. When it comes to our sense of identity, our sense of self, it can be so volatile, right? The things we do to try and feel good about who we are, it can work or it can not work. And the thing with identity is it's something that we pursue since we are little kids, right? Usually around adolescence, this question of who am I starts rattling around in your brain. When you're in middle school, when you're in high school, these are the things you're trying to figure out. You're trying out maybe different clubs in school or hanging out with different kinds of people, all in this quest of going, who am I? What am I about? And for many of us, that question remains into adulthood. I think it's one of the primary things about being human is this quest for identity, this quest to discover who am I and where do I fit into this world. Now, we've been in this series of listening, and you might go, hey, what does identity have to do with listening? And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I want to offer a quick recap of last week in case you weren't here. So we've been in this series on listening. We've talked about different ways that we can listen to the world, listen to other people, listen to people who are different from us. And then last week, Angie talked about what does it look like to listen to ourselves. And when you first hear that, maybe that sounds a little bit weird. But I think once we start putting some language to it, it starts to make sense. She talked about how we've tried to often name this inner guidance. And within the Christian tradition, often we call that the Holy Spirit. In Judaism, it's divine inspiration. Proverbs, the book of Proverbs in the Bible refers to it as Lady Wisdom. Or you might just call it your intuition, right? That gut feeling, that gut inner voice that is communicating to you on who you are, on what you are going to do. The Apostle John, and Angie mentioned this last week, the Apostle John writes about this and he says, you have an anointing or blessing or empowerment within you, and you do not need any other teacher. So within the Bible itself, we see this reference to this voice within us that guides us, that leads us, that empowers us, saying, that's actually all you need. That's the inner teacher that guides you throughout your life. And Angie talked about how we missed it because we were so distracted so often, right? And a few weeks ago, I made a joke about how sometimes I'll watch TV with my phone out. Like I'll be watching TV and on Twitter at the same time because neither one is interesting enough on its own. And I know I'm not the only one who does things like that. We become so distracted, like we can't drive without listening to something. There's all these ways we're constantly filling our lives with noise, which isn't necessarily bad. However, it can mean that we forget how to listen to that voice that's inside. Angie talked about silence and solitude and how that can be a way to kind of regain and rehear that inner voice, that voice of wisdom within us, and how practices like journaling can help with that, of just sitting and being with yourself and with your thoughts and writing. And during this last week on our series of Listening for Lent, I wanted to kind of extend that a little bit and talk about what are the consequences if we don't listen? What happens to us if we stay unplugged from that inner voice? And here is my hypothesis, and what I want to run with tonight is this, that when we fail to listen to the wisdom within, we allow other forces to hijack our sense of identity. When we fail to listen to the wisdom within, we allow other forces to hijack our sense of identity. And to illustrate this, I want to look at a moment from the life of Jesus. Angie briefly mentioned this again last week. We're going to dive into the whole story. Jesus was regularly in the practice of disappearing from his group of friends to go off and be silent, to go and pray and to no doubt listen to that inner wisdom that he himself possessed. And so Jesus was in this constant pattern of being engaged with people and then withdrawing, and being engaged with people and withdrawing. And I think in that he models a really healthy life balance of going, hey, I'm not closing myself off from the world, but I'm also taking the time to check in with myself and with my intuition to make sure I'm still following the path that I'm supposed to be following. So anyways, this happens during a moment where Jesus is withdrawn from the crowd. And the story takes place in Matthew 4, and I'm just going to read it to you, and then we'll kind of talk some more about it. But it says this, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil." Now, just a quick pause right here. We've got mention of the devil showing up here, and in fact, the devil gets some dialogue in here as well, which is kind of fun. The Bible's really interesting when it talks about the devil, and it uses this word accuser more often than it uses any sort of sense of like an actual person. And I know a lot of times we think of the devil, it's like, oh yeah, like pointy ears things, tail. What is this? Trident? Sure, whatever. Some sort of hellish weapon. We have this idea of the devil looking like that, and that's really not biblical. It's nowhere to be found in the Bible. So if it's helpful for you not to think of this as Jesus like interacting with a red dude, but rather just maybe even having this dialogue within himself, that's actually probably a more accurate representation of what was happening here. Anyways, back to the story. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. Well, duh. During that time, the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." Okay, so Jesus is here. He is fasting. He has fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, which is a very long time to not eat food. Okay, would I be alive at the end of that? I don't know. I'm not going to find out. Neither should you. But anyways, he fasts for 40 days, and this accuser comes to him and says to him, "Turn these stones into loaves of bread," which sounds like a very tempting and honestly reasonable offer. But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you are the Son of God, jump off, for the scriptures say he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God." So we have another scene here where Jesus is taken to this high point, this temple, and told to jump off because the angels will protect him. And Jesus says, "You must not test the Lord your God," in response to that. And then the final one is this. It says, "Next the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. 'I will give it all to you,' he said, 'if you will kneel down and worship me.' 'Get out of here, Satan,' Jesus told him, 'for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him.'" Okay, so the third scene takes place on this high mountaintop. Jesus and the accuser are up there, and the accuser says, "Look at all of this. All of this will be yours if you just bow down and worship me." Now, here's what I want to suggest in this, is a lot of this stuff in here isn't inherently bad, right? He says, "Hey, make yourself some food to eat. Jump off a high building, God will protect you." Which, if that's the case, if angels are going to protect you, then that's not inherent. That's not an evil act, right? Then he says, "Worship me," which might be bad. Maybe don't worship the devil. But we have these things, and I think these are representative of different lies that we hear or different ideas that we hear that we can find our identity in, all right? And here are these three different ideas that we find within this story. It is this: I am what I have, I am what I do, and I am what people think or say about me. So I am what I have, that's the loaf of bread. The accuser is offering him something physical, something that he actually really probably needs. He says, "I am what I do." The accuser presents him with this opportunity to jump off this building, which no doubt, if anybody was watching that, would have been an incredibly impressive feat, right? That's a really cool stunt in a Jackass movie or something, to jump off and not die. So he's offering him this opportunity. And then the last one is, "I am what people think or say about me." He's saying, "Hey, I will make you ruler over all this land," in which case people would no doubt admire, respect, fear him in some capacity. And I think when it comes to our own sense of identity, so often so much of what we believe about ourselves is wrapped up in these three different ideas. Okay, think about introducing yourself at a party. You go to a party, you meet some people, and someone's like, "Hey, so who are you? What are you all about?" What are the things that you might say? You don't have to answer out loud, but just think to yourself, what are the things you might say if you were introducing yourself at a party? I think for many of us, probably the first thing that comes to mind is work, right? Say "Oh yeah, I'm a filmmaker," or "I'm an accountant." Another thing that comes to mind might be family. It's I'm a mom or I'm a dad. It might be other sort of relational. I have this partner, that sort of thing. And then I wonder how we would respond if that person then at the party was like, no, that's not what I mean. None of that stuff. Who are you? At which point you're like, I don't want to discuss this at a party. But it does start getting the wheels turning a little bit, where you go, oh man, I'm so used to identifying myself with what I have, what I do, what people think about me. That for me is the biggest one. And that's what I was alluding to at the beginning, that story of I really want people to think I'm a good person. Like that for me is like the big thing. But anyways, we're so used to associating with these things, and none of these things are bad, right? Like, and I'm not saying that these aren't important, that these don't matter, that these don't affect your life. However, if this is the sum total of your identity, of your sense of self, if this is it, what you have, what you do, what people think, then I think you will find yourself in trouble at some point down the road. And here is why, is because when it comes to what we do, what we have, what people think about us, those are all things that are outside of our control, right? To a certain extent. You can do an amazing job at your work, and one day layoffs might come. You can have an amazing relationship with your partner, and yet one day that relationship might end. You might lose the ability to do the thing that you love, the hobby that you're so passionate about, that everyone knows you for. They're like, oh my gosh, Steve, he like climbs mountains with ice picks. I don't know why I said ice picks. It doesn't matter. You might lose the ability to do that thing that everyone knows you for. All these things are so subject to the whims of other forces beyond our control. And I think what's important to notice about what Jesus says here and why he rejects these things is because Jesus realizes that he is more than the sum total of what he had or did or what people thought. And he carried within himself something far more powerful and sustaining than that. And what Jesus had was this own sense of his belovedness. I think this is one of the defining characteristics of the person of Jesus. What makes Jesus Jesus, why he is the way that he is, why he says the peculiar, weird stuff that he does, why he hangs out with the people that he does, is because of this innate sense of his own belovedness. That beyond what he does, what he says, the people that he hangs out with, he has this and no one can take it away from him. And I believe that was the whole mission of his life, was to reveal to the people around him and ultimately to us our own sense of belovedness, our own identity as beloved people over and above everything else that we do. And I know for some of us that might be a strange thing to hear. That might be a hard thing to believe about yourself. When I was in my early 20s, I would say I was severely, probably clinically depressed during that time. And one of the things that happens when you're dealing with depression is so much just negative self-talk all of the time. And some of us even grew up within faith traditions that may have amplified that. Some of us grew up hearing about things like total depravity, might grown up hearing about how we're such wicked sinners, and yet somehow God saves us. But those messages kind of can stick to your soul almost, and it can be kind of hard to lose sense of this idea that perhaps we might be beloved just the way that we are. What's interesting is in the Bible, that's how it all starts. Within the book of Genesis, God creates man and woman in the story, and he says, this is very good. You are very good. That's how the story begins, and yet we want to jump, or not us, but so many Christians often jump straight to Genesis 3, where the fall happens, and they go, no, that's who we are. And what I would propose, and what I think Jesus would also propose, is that in fact, our starting place is Genesis 2, and that you are very good, and that you are beloved. It'd be hard work digging through kind of these negative self-messages. It'd be hard work trying to uncover this sense of internal belovedness, but I think it's worth it. I think it requires bravery, but I think you will discover something powerful that your inner wisdom has to say to you if you're willing to do that sort of work. Henry Nouwen has this quote about prayer that I absolutely love. He says this: the real work of prayer is to become silent and listen to the voice that says good things about me. Now let's just pause there for a second. Did anybody grow up with a definition of prayer like this? No? Yeah, me neither. Oh my gosh. I just found this last week. I was like, Henry, what are you doing? This is powerful, and I think this is so, so true. I don't know about you, but I've wasted a lot of breath on prayer, asking God to do things that never came to pass, probably because they weren't right for me, and probably because they were actually running counter to who I am. And I love this reframing of prayer as to be silent and listen to the voice, and to keep listening to that voice until it starts to say good things about you. There's this story in the Old Testament about Jacob. Yeah, Jacob. Jacob has this experience where he wrestles with this angel, and during the process of that wrestling, they wrestle all night, and the angel, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure how it goes, is the angel says something to the effect of, let me go, and Jacob says, I will not let you go until you give me a blessing. And then the angel blesses him. And I wonder if within this framework, this definition of prayer, our attitudes might be similar. That we're going to say, I'm going to sit in silence until I get the blessing, until I hear the good things that are said about me. Henry Nouwen goes on to say, to gently push aside and silence the many voices that question my goodness, and to trust that I will hear the voice of blessing, that demands real effort. And so then this is the invitation. The invitation is to go, okay, my identity isn't exclusively wrapped up in what I do, in what people think about me, in the things that I have. Because those things are fickle. Those things will change. A lot of those things we don't have any control over. However, the inner voice of wisdom that sits within each one of us, that is calling us out as beloved, as loved, as good, that is something that no one can take from you. And so my hope for us tonight, as we enter into this Easter season, which is celebrating new life, which is celebrating this idea of resurrection, that we can enter into it as people who are saying, I am beloved, no matter what. No one can take that from me. Because deep within you is a voice that is whispering this to you. One last quick piece of scripture, and then I'll wrap up here. But there's this story, the parable that Jesus tells about people who build a house. He tells a story about how some people build this house on sand. And when people built the house on sand, the storm came and washed it away. And then other people built a house on rock. And when the storm came, the house on the rock didn't blow away because the foundation was firm. And for me, what I'm trying to live into is seeing my own sense of belovedness, my own identity as good and loved, as that strong foundation upon which to build a life. Because the reality is, the opinions of others, that's sand. What you have, that's sand. What you can do, sand. However, that rock, that sense of peace, of knowing that you are loved, I can't take that from you. No one can. I want to close just leading us in just a quick time of reflection and meditation. If the band wants to come up now, that would be great. So if you're comfortable doing so, go ahead and close your eyes and just focus on your breath for just a moment. Pay attention to the inhale and the exhale. And as you breathe, I want you to just ask yourself, for you, who am I? And when you ask, who am I, all sorts of stuff might come to your mind. And if you could, just start discarding the things that are maybe on the surface, that maybe aren't representative of the true you. Who am I? And if you can't, in honesty, arrive at the place of I am beloved, first of all, I want you to know that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. My encouragement to you, if that's you, maybe to keep exploring that in the next week or two. Keep asking that question. Keep pushing through, talking to friends, people you trust. Because my firmest belief is that for each one of us, that sense of belovedness, however deep it may be buried, is still there.
As we sing this last song, may it be a reflection on what you need to hear. May it be a reflection of what Spirit speaks to you and in you about you. Oftentimes in Christianity, we speak a lot about and to God. Sometimes we don't spend enough time hearing from or letting the divine speak to us about who Spirit thinks we are. And I have a feeling some of you probably need to hear that this evening. And so whatever is true, let it be heard. We spend most of our life, as Steve said, looking for our identity in all, sometimes the wrong places. And as he was speaking, I asked myself, how would I identify myself if I couldn't use a job or a person or something external to describe myself? And I can instantly come up with adjectives, like I'm creative, I'm silly, I'm kind. I can think of all those things, but you know, the first thing that kept resounding in me was, I am loved. Honestly, I am loved. And that's not really an identity in the way the world often looks for an identity. But I thought that is the best identity. I'm just Angie, I'm loved. And may you feel that in this place this evening. May you feel loved in who you are. And if you wrestle with your identity, as I believe every human does, I believe that's part of the human condition, that we ask ourselves, why are we here? Who am I? Every human I've ever talked to asks, why am I here and who am I? That as you're on this journey asking those questions, may you find the answer. And may you find the answer within. I want to close this out in a moment of prayer together. And then I want to invite you to stick around for a minute. We have a few announcements. Source of our identity. Be the mirror that we need to see when we forget who we are. Be the voice of reason when we've lost all sense of self. Be the arms of comfort and strength when we feel weak within ourselves. Remind us again and again of these words, you are good and you are loved. Be with us this week. And should I say, let us have an awareness of you this week, because I firmly believe that we are in you and you are in us. Let us have an awareness of your presence. Let us have an awareness of that love, that deep divine love. Be with us this week. And thank you for this community. May they know they're loved. In the name of love we pray. Amen.